Hello and welcome to another Wayland Library 3D printing video. This time we're not going to be going over designing models as much as we'll be going over how to fix them. So we'll cover how to split models to make them either easier to print or save time, and how to repair models that might have errors or holes, etc. And with that said, let's dive right into it. Part 1, cutting or chopping up a model. So you've got something very big, doesn't fit on your build plate, and you can't scale it down because it's something like a mask. Or maybe you have something big and detailed and you just don't want to scale it down. But oh my god, what is that? Either way, Meshmixer is probably the tool you're going to want to use. You do need to download it, so go on and open up a browser, go to the download page and install. Once it's done installing, open it up and you will come to this screen. And we can go ahead and import our file. I'll import the mask I showed from earlier. And from here it'll be pretty straightforward. We're going to use edit. We're going to duplicate it because we're going to create 2 cuts of this item. And to create those cuts, we're going to use plain cut. So we'll select our first copy. We'll go to plain cut. And you will probably be using a combination of hitting down on the scroll wheel or clicking down to pan, and then holding down shift and doing that to kind of change the view. So I'm going to orient myself a little bit here. And what I'm going to try and do is cut it in 2 pieces just below where the mask straps would go. So first thing, this green bar here for rotating this way. And it might be a little hard to see on my screen, but there is a circle kind of going around where you can rotate in even increments. So we'll rotate at 90. I'll get a better look at the bottom here. Move it a little bit up. Don't want to go past the strap inserts. So yeah, I'll do it right about there. And I'll just hit accept. And now I'll do something very similar for the upper portion. So I'll select the second copy, go back to plain cut, and like before, I'll shift this 90 degrees. And what I really want to do at this point is try to line it up with the line. You can kind of see the outline of the first cut I made. So we're gonna, you can actually see if you go past it, it will start to reveal the solid object. So that's right up there. And it appears at the moment that we're just going to create 2 bottom halves, but this big blue arrow over here on the corner will change which side we're cutting off. So as you can see, we're going to chop off the bottom this time to get the top half. We'll hit accept. And we don't really have a seam here. They might overlap a little bit, but that is a pretty even cut as far as I can tell. And sorry, I meant to say gap, not seam. There will always be a little bit of a visible seam when you're, chopping parts in half. Anyway, all we need to do now is export these pieces. So this is our bottom half. I'm going to select this. I'm going to export it. Change OBJ to STL. And, just do mask bottom. Select our top half, export, mask top. And if we go ahead and load those exports into our slicer, You can see we now have two separate pieces we can print individually, and they will fit on our build plate, no problem. And to quickly go over something a little more complex, we have our Lord of Terror here. If I was going to cut this guy up, I would duplicate him once, and then I would probably try to split the upper and bottom halves, but I would want to split it so that I don't, chop up his fingers. So I would probably tilt this maybe 20 or 30 degrees, move it up, and then just make sure I wasn't, cutting off any of his arm or hands. I would cut that, and then, since his hands have these really fine points, they're kind of stacked, they're pointing downward, it's going to be really tricky with an FDM printer. I would also probably duplicate his upper half a couple more times, and then try and chop off both hands so I could print those individually, like so. Well, I'd probably move it up a little bit to not cut off his horns, but you get the idea. Now let's take a model that doesn't need to be cut up, but has something else wrong with it. As you can see with this little pickaxe model I imported here, the slicer is rendering about half of it. It seems pretty hollow. Supports aren't really taking, so how do we go about fixing this model so it will come up properly in our slicer? The first method, and probably the quickest and easiest, is to just use Tinkercad. We basically import it, export it. Tinkercad is very strict about working with continuous solid objects. So if you have an object like this, which doesn't, seem to have a glaring problem with it, it's not like it's missing a piece or it's riddled with holes. For whatever reason, the slicer just doesn't like it. You can import it into Tinkercad, and then Tinkercad's very aggressive export function will bring it up as a solid item. Just go through it really quickly here. And as you can see, it has imported looking fine. So we'll just go ahead and export it. Fantabulous blah 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 blah. This was our problem model. And as you can see, looks and works fine. But what do we do if the object is too large to import in Tinkercad, or it just plain didn't work? Well, method number 2 is to use Fusion 360. You do need to download and install this. I'm not going to go over that in this video. I do go over it in another video. I'll put a link in the description. But for now, I'm just going to assume you have it installed and open, and you're on this screen. So let's import our problem item. There's our pickaxe our slicer was having trouble with before. Let's run repairs on this thing. So I'm going to click it, should highlight everything. And then up here, we can actually, these are tabs you can click on, so it defaults to solid usually. Just click on Mesh, Prepare, Repair. And all we need to do now is select a repair type. So full disclosure, I don't know exactly what these options do, but from what I can tell, you can kind of regard this as like a 1 to 4 list in terms of intensity or aggressiveness in repairs. So close holes is like the lightest. If you don't have that many issues with the model, this is probably what you want. And rebuild is kind of like the most intense and aggressive form of automated repair. So what I would recommend if you're attempting a Fusion 360 repair is to start off with close holes, click OK, and then export and test in the slicer. Or if you're submitting to the library or someplace else, maybe do like a save for each form of repair. As the thing to remember about repairs is sometimes especially the automated ones, is sometimes they can get really aggressive in attempting to repair a model, and sometimes they can deform it or remove features entirely in their attempts to like close a hole or reform a face or what have you. So take it in steps is my recommendation. All right, let's see if our Fusion 360 close holes repair did it. We'll load this in. And upon examination, it actually doesn't look like it did. It does seem like it will print fine, but it's obviously going to need supports, and yeah, it is not going to work in its current state. So let's go back to Fusion, and we'll up the intensity of the repair. And we do have this little exclamation point, so it looks like close holes did not quite do the job. We'll try jumping straight to a rebuild. We'll see what this gives us. Error message popped up there, so we'll just keep trying. Pretty easy to click repair and just try out the various forms. Let's see what wrap gets us. Alright, that seemed to take. We'll give it the old export. Call it wrap. And we'll see what our slicer thinks of it. There we go. Wrap seemed to do the trick. Like I said, those various forms of repair you can think of as just different types of intensity. So, try each one out as you go about repairing your object. Eventually, you should settle on one that does the trick. Alright, but what if you have an object that is awkward enough that you can't split it up with Meshmixer when you've tried the Tinkercad repair and the Fusion 360 and nothing seems to take? Well, now is when Blender kicks in. Alright, can just click off of that, tap X on the keyboard, we can delete the default box. I went ahead and loaded the example model in here. You can do that by going to File, Import STL, and then just work your way through your directory. You'll also notice I enabled the mouse and keyboard overlays. That's just because Blender is an entirely different beast, and it might help some people. Alright, so first I'm gonna go over Blender's splitting method. As you can see, this would be an absolute nightmare to cut up in Meshmixer, and would be even worse to try and 3D print on account of just the absolutely insane amount of overhangs and supports and thin parts of the model. So let's go over it. I'm not going to do the entire model. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and target this trophy rack on the back here, and I'm going to try and separate it from the rest of the model. So first thing we want to do is up here, we're going to go from object mode to edit mode, and we can double tap A to deselect. It kind of selects everything by default. Well, we want to start with nothing selected. And let's zoom in on the target here. We're also going to swap from vertex to face, which is these three buttons up here are for vertexes, edges, and faces. We will primarily be using B on the keyboard to make selection boxes, C for selection circles, and then just good old-fashioned left clicking with Shift. And you will probably quickly realize that we are going to try to select the entirety of this segment here. But as we do this, we're only selecting one side. So before we select anything, we're going to tap Z and go to wireframe. This makes it so if we drag out a box or a selection circle, we'll go right through everything and just select the entirety of it, and it will save us a whole lot of time. Alright, so let's select everything that we can here without touching other pieces of the model, which shouldn't be too hard as long as we keep the angle right. And you can follow the keyboard and mouse overlay if you're curious exactly what I'm clicking here. Zoom in a little bit here. And at this point, I think I want to go back to the solid view because I really just want to get this back plate, and I don't really want to, cut through to different parts of the model, which is going to be very easy to do if I keep wireframe on and I try to select like this. I'll wind up selecting like his entire arm over there. Alright, and I think I'm going to use circle. You can actually shrink or enlarge this with the scroll wheel. I might shrink it a little bit because now I really want to start selecting certain spots. I think I really want to keep this spot as my line. Probably also going to use shift and left click to select very particular pieces like these in here to make sure I get the whole thing. Alright, so I've just about selected everything. Just do a quick once over. See, we missed that face. We actually don't want those selected. Because when you are doing this type of splitting with Blender, you want to make sure you kind of, you have to imagine yourself as selecting like one continuous object. You don't want to branch off into random pieces. It should be as nice and even as you can get it. And this is looking pretty good, best as I can tell. So at this point we have everything selected. I'm going to hit P on my keyboard and we're going to go by selection. As you can see by this menu up here, we've got two separate objects now. We can go ahead and separate these two now, so we can go back to object mode. You can see this list on the right hand side here. Whatever we highlight is what we're selecting, so let's select the thing we separated. We're going to go to move, if you're following my cursor here. And sometimes the move arrows will be in a weird space. So just hold down shift and the scroll wheel to pan around. You'll find them. And then we can just hold down click and separate it. As you can probably see though, as of right now, this object will print hollow, because this bottom part here is not solid, it's just hollowed out as a result of the separation process. So we're going to go back to edit mode. You can see it looks like we accidentally pulled a little bit extra here. You can get rid of that later. Shouldn't be too big of a problem. It doesn't look like we pulled any holes out from what I can see. So we should just be able to delete that later. You can ignore it for now. I will say if you get to this point and it looks like you dragged way more out than this, or your separation caused a whole bunch of holes from misclicking on the main model, don't worry about it. You can just hold down Control or the Command key if you're on Mac, and then just tap Z. It's basically the shortcut for undo. You just tap Z until you get back to the point where those are merged and you have all this selected, and you can just deselect. And you would deselect by just holding down Shift and clicking the selected face. Anyhow, repairing this segment, what we're going to do is use Blender's fill function. So we're going to go to Edge, and what we basically want to do is kind of select the outermost edges going along this bottom segment here. So just to show you what I mean, I'll start doing it now. Go like this, holding down Shift and left clicking. Nope, don't want that one, want that one. Basically trying to select the entirety of the perimeter here. Alright, I've got all my edges selected here. All I need to do now is tap F, and it will automatically fill the gap into a solid section. It is a little uneven. If you were actually going to 3D print this, you might want to, sand this down to make it a little more round. Or what I would probably do if I was really going to 3D print this right now, I would probably undo my way all the way back to where I was selecting, and I would probably omit this kind of bottom half here. You can see those unselected segments were a bit of a problem, so I'd probably try to keep my selections along the upper half of this middle line, if that makes sense. And then you can go back to object mode, and you can actually select the separated segments and export them and name them appropriately. So you do this for the whole model. You might separate the arms, export them as left arm, right arm, the head, so on and so forth. That fill function is also what you want to do to repair models that have holes in them. So you might be trying to 3D print something, or maybe you notice it yourself, but your model has a hole. As we can see, I kind of just intentionally made here, but you would basically do the same thing. If you notice it in your model, you'd go up to edit mode, you'd go edges, you'd select the perimeter like we just did with the separation, you'd fill it, and hole mostly fixed. Just one quick aside, Blender is not really made for 3D printing. So while these methods do usually work, sometimes they export with errors. But luckily we just went over how to usually fix those. So if you export your Blender edits and they're not quite sticking, try the Tinkercad repair, try the Fusion 360 repair. In my experience, one of those will usually work. That's going to do it for this video from the Wayland library. Happy 3D printing, everybody.